UFC 321, Dateline Abu Dhabi, as the great John Anik would say. It was the night where the UFC heavyweight division was supposed to get its mojo back. We had a championship fight between Tom Aspinall and Ciryl Gane in the main event, a fight that many MMA fans have been clamoring to see for years at this point. We had a number one contendership bout between Aleksandar Volkov and Jailton Almeida, a little bit lower down on the main card, and we even had the number 15 ranked Valter Walker competing on the prelims. This felt like a very important night for the heavyweight division to move into the new era, for the next generation of fighters to take their place. But somehow, this damn heavyweight division is in a worse spot post UFC 321 than it was heading in. And that is because in the heavyweight championship main event, we didn't see Tom Aspinall successfully defend his undisputed title for the first time with another emphatic, impressive performance and knockout victory. And we also didn't get to see Ciryl Gane shock the world and prove that he can get the job done in the biggest spots, and in his third attempt at challenging for the undisputed throne, finally get the belt wrapped around his waist. Instead, we saw Tom Aspinall remain the heavyweight champion of the world because of a no contest. The fight was waved off at the 4-minute and 35-second mark of the opening round due to an accidental eye poke from Ciryl Gane given to Tom Aspinall in both eyes. And as we all know, with eye pokes, groin strikes, etc., the fighter on the receiving end can have up to 5 minutes to recover from that strike, whether that be wiping their eyes out with a cloth or getting some deep breathing in and adjusting the cup from a low blow. And that is exactly what we saw Tom Aspinall do with his eyes here, with the right eye specifically taking the more extreme blow, even though it looked as though his left eye was the one that got knuckle-deep action from Ciryl Gane. Pause. And it turned out that these eye pokes were so severe that Tom was barely able to open his right eye. He could not continue the fight. He could not see out of it. Therefore, the fight would be waved off and he would remain the heavyweight champion of the world. And this result is something that we could not have happen. For goodness sake, we could have had a 25-minute snooze fest for all I care with someone getting their hand raised. That would have been a better option than this. Because now this fight is just surrounded in drama and in controversy, which is exactly what the storylines were heading into this bout, because of the Jon Jones saga, because of Francis Ngannou leaving years ago, because of Stipe getting a championship bout last year against Jon instead of Tom, Tom becoming an interim champion and defending an interim belt instead of getting a unification bout, and now here taking on Ciryl Gane in what was Gane's third undisputed title opportunity, even though many people think he shouldn't have even got this opportunity because they felt that he lost last December to Aleksandar Volkov. What the MMA community and what this division and what the UFC as a whole needed was a solidified victor, whether that be by way of the boring decision that I alluded to, or particularly what would have been best was an emphatic finish from either one of these fighters, and instead we got none of those options, and we are just left with more questions than we have answers. And what makes matters worse is that, one, we were just 25 seconds away from being done with round one and heading into round two. 25 seconds more is all we needed without an eye poke. And secondly, this fight was awesome. These two were going back and forth, tit for tat, toe to toe in the striking realm, and they proved without a shadow of a doubt that they are the two best heavyweights in the world, Tom Aspinall and Ciryl Gane. Two fighters that we had never seen before from a stylistic perspective in this heavyweight division's 30-plus year history. What we saw in the opening 4 minutes and 35 seconds is exactly what MMA fans had been waiting for years, when these two would inevitably step in the cage with one another. And not to mention, it was hands down, bar none, the hardest test of Tom Aspinall's UFC career to date, as he would actually be outstruck by Ciryl Gane 30-27. All strikes landed and attempted by both men, deemed significant, mind you. This was an incredible back and forth fight. Ciryl Gane was landing his patented jab that would bloody up the nose of Tom Aspinall and mix in a plethora of leg kicks, I believe landing 13 out of 13. And on the side of the champion, Tom Aspinall, he was getting some very significant shots in at the head of Ciryl Gane. And to Gane's credit, he was able to weather that storm better than any other Tom Aspinall opponent to date. We were in store for truly one of the best heavyweight fights of 2025. Probably the best, because off the top of my head, I can't remember any significant heavyweight bouts this year, which just goes to show how much in shambles this weight class is, and that this result just continues to send it further down into the shadow realm. So there's not much to say here in the aftermath of this fight, unfortunately, other than we need to see it ran back and we need to see it happen immediately. Or as Michael Scott would say,
ASAP as possible.
And so what I'm hoping can be done is that at UFC 323 on December 6th, Las Vegas, Nevada, the final pay-per-view of the year and potentially in the UFC's history, we can have this heavyweight championship fight added on as the third championship bout of that card, because we already have Merab Dvalishvili taking on Petr Yan in a rematch, and we have Alexandre Pantoja Pantoja defending against Joshua Van for the flyweight title. So when you take into account that these are heavyweight fighters that don't have to cut weight, they only competed for 4 minutes. Yes, they both took significant damage, but you give them over 5 weeks to prepare for the rematch, assuming that Tom's eye can be back to full strength within a week or two. I think that is absolutely what should be done, because that would then give the fighters still 3 weeks to prepare for the rematch, and they just went through a full training camp for one another. It's not like they need to make that many more adjustments. Now, is it likely to take place in just a little over a month's time on December 6th? Probably not, but a guy can dream. Honestly, what I feel like is the more plausible option now is that the UFC can book this rematch for the first card in January for the Paramount Plus deal for the UFC, because it seems that they don't have a 100% certain answer on what's happening with Ilia Topuria and the Justin Gaethje and Paddy Pimblett situation for the lightweight championship. So that gives the UFC time to figure out what they want to do at 155, delay that to maybe February, and have the heavyweights headline the first Paramount Plus big event pay-per-view / numbered card. And quickly, this result, although not having a definitive winner, does have a pretty significant trickle-down effect on the rest of the heavyweight division and the UFC's future as a whole. Because my bold prediction in the aftermath of UFC 320, when Alex Pereira regained his light heavyweight throne after knocking out Magomed Ankalaev in the opening round, was that he would take on the winner of Tom Aspinall and Ciryl Gane and make his heavyweight debut in an attempt to make history and become a 3-weight world champion, the first person to ever do so. And then I predicted that the winner of Pereira versus Gane or Aspinall would take on John Jones at the White House card next summer. But this absolutely throws a huge wrench into that plan that I had, therefore meaning that Alex Pereira likely will now stay at light heavyweight for at least one more fight and defend his title against more than likely Carlos Alberg, which then delays any sort of timeline of getting someone on that late June White House fight card in the summertime against John Jones, which then makes that milestone fight card harder to book for the UFC. Not to mention now cards will have to be shuffled around, because I'm sure even though nothing's been announced for January, February, you've got to think that the UFC at least has some thoughts in mind, because there are other champions that aren't fighting at the end of the year that would be available in the opening months of 2026, such as an Alexander Volkanovski. So I'm very curious to see what the UFC will do in the aftermath of this Aspinall versus Gane no contest controversy. How quickly will they rebook the rematch, and what will it mean for the rest of the heavyweight division? And quickly, while I'm on the topic, let's jump into the Alexander Volkov Jailton Almeida fight, because that's something that was also going to be included in the trickle-down effect. That was supposed to be a fight determining the number one contender for the heavyweight championship. And while we at least did see a winner in that one, Alexander Volkov, we saw pretty much a snooze fest fight that did not see a fighter put a stamp on it. As a matter of fact, you could say that it's the second consecutive fight for Alexander Volkov that can be deemed a robbery, except this time it was on the side of him getting the victory, and last time in December it was Ciryl Gane getting the win over him. And that is because Jailton Almeida would land 7 of 9 takedowns successfully and rack up 10 minutes and 47 seconds of control time out of a 15-minute fight, mind you. However, when you take a look at the total strikes landed, it goes on the side of Volkov, outnumbering Almeida largely with a 123-27 margin. However, just 24 of those 123 strikes landed by Volkov were deemed significant, and just 9 out of Almeida's 27 total. This was a very lackluster fight that came down to damage versus control time, and it had the MMA community and media outlets respectively up in arms on who the winner should have been. And now you can't even put Volkov in there with Aspinall or Gane, because that fight didn't even get a damn winner in the first place. So I figured I might as well just pair those two heavyweight bouts together, because there's truly not much to say in terms of an aftermath perspective, when ultimately we just need to see Aspinall versus Gane rebooked, and fingers crossed it's before the end of 2025, even though I know that that's a very steep hill to climb. But be sure to give me your thoughts on that heavyweight championship fight down in the comments below. What did you make of the 4 minutes and 35 seconds of action that we got to see? Because it was a very high level back and forth bout. You could just feel that we were en route to a very special heavyweight clash. And for what it's worth, give me your thoughts on Volkov versus Almeida as well, and who do you think should have been the winner in that fight? In the co-main event of UFC 321, we did see a definitive winner, and we saw a new strawweight champion be crowned in what was a vacant championship opportunity heading in due to Zhang Weili giving away her title to pursue greatness at 125 pounds next month. But the two women competing for that vacated strawweight championship were Mackenzie Dern and Virna Jandiroba. So not only were they competing for a vacant throne given up by a dominant champion in Zhang Weili, but it was a rematch nearly 5 years in the making, where Mackenzie Dern would take the first fight in 2020, and in the aftermath of UFC 321, she is now 2-0 against Virna Jandiroba, and Mackenzie Dern is the new strawweight champion of the world. She finally made good on all of the hype and stardom that she had coming into the UFC years ago at this point. All of the jiu-jitsu credibility and world championships that she carried with her into mixed martial arts, and she is now a mixed martial arts world champion in the world's largest promotion, the UFC. And this was actually a very entertaining and razor close fight to watch, as these two would attempt over 700 strikes and land over 450 of them. This was a back and forth bloody scrap where both of them came out with bruised and battered faces. There was plenty of action on the feet and even more action on the canvas, as over half of the fight would take place with reversals and transitions on the mat. All in all, the scorecards would read 48-47 times 2 for Mackenzie Dern and 149-46, leading to a unanimous decision, which was a little bit surprising. I wouldn't have been shocked in the slightest had a judge given the fight to Virna Jandiroba. And that is truly how back and forth this fight went, and to a certain extent can be kind of compared to Volkov versus Almeida, where it seemed that damage more so outweighed the control time, because as you can see here as we scroll through the stats, Virna would rack up 9 minutes and 7 seconds of control time, whereas Dern would have just 3 minutes and 45 seconds. However, Dern would outland Virna in the significant strikes by 12 and in the total strikes by 41. And if you look at it on a round by round basis, look how closely contested those first 4 rounds were, which is why on 2 of the 3 judges' scorecards, it was 2-2 going into the 5th and final round, so someone had to pull it out the fire and truly solidify and make a statement in that 5th round, and that is what Mackenzie Dern was able to do, having her most successful round in terms of strike differential, outlanding Virna 71-42, although Virna did have 2 minutes more of control time. So in my honest opinion, I don't think you could have went wrong either way. Whether it been Virna Jandiroba or Mackenzie Dern, there wouldn't have been a robbery in my opinion on who the winner could have been. And if you even look at those scorecards, there were discrepancies all throughout the board. In the 2 scorecards that have it 48-47 for Dern, they both scored the opening 2 rounds differently. Michael Bell giving Dern round 1 and Jandiroba round 2, and Chris Lee doing the exact opposite. But something that remains consistent across all 3 scorecards is that Mackenzie Dern was able to rally out the championship rounds 4 and 5 and prove that she was championship potential, and that all of her 5-round main events leading into this rematch with Virna Jandiroba would pay dividends. So unlike the result of the heavyweight division, where we were supposed to see the new era of that weight class begin, we do now see the post-Zhang Weili era start for the strawweights, and that is led by none other than Mackenzie Dern, the new champion. So who is next? Who will be her first title defense? And although I wasn't really thinking about this question in the lead up to the fight, it's front of mind, of course, in the aftermath, because Zhang Weili is more than likely going to finish out her career at 125 pounds, especially if she defeats Valentina Shevchenko. If she loses, I could maybe see a world where she comes back down, but she is getting a little bit older now, so maybe 125 is where she will finish it out. Time will tell. We'll see in a month. But for the near future, it's clear that Mackenzie Dern will be facing someone not named Zhang Weili in her first title defense, and as they discussed in the post-fight press conference, it may just be Tatiana Suarez. As we know, in February, Tatiana suffered her first loss of her career by losing a title fight to Zhang Weili at UFC 312 and in very convincing fashion. However, at Noche UFC in September, Tatiana would get a big, much-needed bounce-back victory into the win column, and she would do so by getting a decision win over Amanda Lemos. And while it wasn't the most exciting fight we've ever seen, it was at least pretty convincing on the side of Tatiana coming out as the clear winner. So in the post-UFC 321 hoopla, and it goes as follows. We have our first title defense for Mackenzie Dern in the strawweight division against Tatiana Suarez, more than likely happening in the first half of 2026. Mackenzie did take a lot of shots in this fight, so she's got to rest up for the remainder of 2025 and then begin a training camp in the early portions of next year. And then we have our number 1 contendership bout in the strawweight division between Yan Xiaonan, a former title challenger, and Louie Godinez sitting at number 6, coming off of the biggest win of her career over former champion Jessica Andrade just a few months ago. For Yan Xiaonan, she would enter that fight against Louie Godinez coming off of a loss to Virna Jandiroba in what was a number 1 contendership bout. But prior to that, she got a victory, and a bounce-back victory at that, against Tabitha Ricci following her title fight loss to Zhang Weili in April of 2024 at UFC 300 in what was a very fun 5-round fight. And for Louie Godinez, as I mentioned, she's coming off of the biggest win of her career against Jessica Andrade, and before that, she also had a victory over Julia Pilastri, a short notice opponent. So if she was able to get a win over Yan Xiaonan, a former title challenger, and make her win streak 3, she would be up next for a title shot. And another wrinkle to add into this number 1 contender bout that I'm trying to convince the UFC matchmakers to book is that both Yan Xiaonan and Louie Godinez have history with Mackenzie Dern, the new strawweight champion. For Godinez, that was actually the last loss that she suffered, and that was in August of 2024, where she would lose a decision to Dern. And for Yan Xiaonan, she actually has a victory over Mackenzie Dern, and that was in October of 2022. So do you agree with my matchmaking for the strawweight division? Let me know down in the comments below. And while you're at it, be sure to let me know what you thought of this co-main event scrap, because it was a very fun fight in my opinion. And do you think Mackenzie Dern was the rightful winner and is deserving to be the new strawweight queen? In the featured bout of the evening, we saw a high-level clash in the bantamweight division that had very high stakes on it as well, and that was Umar Nurmagomedov, currently sitting at number 2 in the world at 135, versus Mario Bautista, ranked number 9, and riding an 8-fight win streak into UFC 321, but in the aftermath, it was their Nurmagomedov name that came out on top once again. Umar would earn the unanimous decision 30-27 across the board, after pretty much having his way with Mario Bautista, landing 11 out of 14 takedowns and racking up nearly 11 minutes of control time. However, it didn't come without at least a little bit of adversity, because in the opening portions of round number 2, Mario Bautista would actually land a knockdown over Umar with a nasty knee that came up the middle as Umar was shooting in for a takedown. And you could tell that that is what Mario was trying to capitalize on, especially in round 2, but it just wasn't enough, as Umar was able to recover extremely quickly from that knockdown and would rack up 3 minutes of control time in that very same round. It wasn't the craziest performance of Umar's career by any means. It wasn't some absolutely he should be next title earning performance in my opinion, but it was an opportunity for Umar to prove that he can bounce back from adversity, because he suffered the first loss of his entire career in January of this year in a title fight against Merab Dvalishvili at UFC 311. So it showed his mental toughness, being able to bounce back from a loss, something that he had never had to face before, and doing so against someone that had a ton of momentum in Bautista, who hadn't lost in years, and as I stated, was on an 8-fight win streak. So Umar is now back in the win column. He shut down a big win streak of Mario and holds his spot in the top 3 of the bantamweight division, with the title fight happening in just a little over a month's time at UFC 323, where Merab will be taking on Petr Yan in a rematch, and if Merab can successfully defend his title, he will rack up 4 title defenses in 1 calendar year, something that the UFC has never had happen before. And being that Umar was still very competitive in his loss to Merab in January, I would not be shocked one bit if Umar gets the next crack at Merab or Petr Yan, the winner of UFC 323. However, if Petr Yan can somehow defeat Merab, I could see the UFC booking a trilogy due to Merab's dominance and willingness to compete throughout the year. And when you also take a look back at the pre-fight press conference, where Umar stated that he wanted this fight with Mario to be a number 1 contendership bout, but Dana said that he had to go out there and make it well known to the crowd and put a stamp on it, if you will, and compare that to what actually took place in the octagon. That isn't exactly what happened. So while yes, of course, Umar made it known that he wants to get that rematch with Merab and that he cares more about getting the victory over him than having the actual bantamweight title around his waist, however, he was also very open in saying that he wants to fight one more time before Ramadan, and that he is willing to take on someone that isn't Merab or Petr Yan for the title, mentioning names such as Deiveson Figueiredo, the former flyweight champion turned bantamweight contender coming off of a victory at UFC Rio a couple of weeks ago, and Aiemann Zahabi, who is now on a 7-fight win streak in his own right, most recently last weekend at UFC Vancouver, where he defeated Marlon Vera, a former title challenger at 135. And not only was Umar expressing an openness to take on other contenders to truly solidify himself as a title challenger, but he was very humble and essentially said that he is nowhere near the level of Khabib Nurmagomedov, and that he still has a lot of room to grow to be the best in the world and to even sniff the success of Khabib, his protege. So even though the fight wasn't the most exciting, I do think that in the MMA community's eyes, Umar gained a lot of respect in just his open and humble opinions in the aftermath of this performance, and that I will tip my hat to Umar, and I'm very curious to see how the UFC will look to book him moving forward. Will they do the rematch with Merab, assuming he can defeat Petr Yan in December, or will they take him up on his willingness to take on someone like Deiveson Figueiredo or Damon Zahabi. I tend to lean with the latter, but let me know what you think down below. In the opening fight of the pay-per-view card, we saw Azamat Murzakanov extend his perfect professional record to 16-0 and now 6-0 in the UFC. 5 of his 6 wins in the Ultimate Fighting Championship by way of knockout, and this one was by far the biggest of his career because he came in at number 10, taking on the number 7 ranked Aleksandar Rakic, and he knocked him out essentially with one punch. It was a nasty finish and a big statement win from Azamat, who had quietly risen into the top 15 of the light heavyweight division, but this one absolutely solidifies himself as a title challenger. Because I think with the current state of the light heavyweight division, all Azamat needs is one more victory and he will be in the driver's seat for a championship opportunity. Because as I stated in the main event discussion, Alex Pereira will now more than likely have to compete at light heavyweight at least one more time, and that will be against none other than Carlos Ulberg, if I had to guess, who is on a 9-fight win streak, most recently a first-round knockout over Dominic Reyes at the end of September. So come Tuesday morning, Azamat will likely be at least number 7 in the world, and with Jan Blachowicz and Bogdan Guskov booked to happen in December, I believe that there's only one name available for Azamat Murzakanov to take on next, and that is none other than Jiří Procházka, who is coming off of back-to-back wins over former champion Jamal Hill, and most recently a knockout over Khalil Roundtree Jr. However, with Carlos Ulberg being on a 9-fight win streak, he should absolutely be next for Alex Pereira's throne, and when you take into account that Jiří is 0-2 against Poatan, he should not be fighting for the belt next. Now, could he sit on the sideline and get the winner of Pereira versus Ulberg? Yes, I think he could, and the UFC would be okay with that, but why don't we just truly solidify it? If Jiří Procházka can win 3 fights in a row and stop the momentum of Azamat Murzakanov, give him the first loss of his career, he can absolutely get next at a title shot, regardless of if Pereira or Ulberg is the champion. And for Azamat, if he can beat a former champion in Jiří Procházka and have a perfect undefeated record heading into a title shot, he should be next for the championship. And if not Jiří Procházka, who would you book Azamat Murzakanov with next? Let me know down below, because in my opinion, the options are slim. The most emphatic finish of the night actually belonged to someone that doesn't even have a ranking next to their name and doesn't have that much name value until UFC 321 took place, and that belongs to Quillan Salkilld, who secured the first round head kick knockout over the veteran Nasrat Haqparast, who was also on a 5-fight win streak heading into this bout, and this was one of the most brutal knockouts of all of 2025. This head kick would send Nasrat down to the canvas face first, and he would lie there for minutes. It was truly a scary scene for a little while in that octagon, and thankfully he was able to get up, and I hope that he can recover swiftly and in a healthy manner from this knockout blow. But what a performance from Quillan Salkilld, who now is on everyone's radar in this lightweight division because he is 3-0 in the UFC. He's a 2024 Contender Series alum. He has not lost a fight since his debut as a professional, meaning that he is on a 10-fight win streak, and 7 of those 10 wins are by way of stoppage, 4 knockouts, 3 submissions. He's only 25 years old, and by the way, the 3-0 record in the UFC, all of them taking place in 2025. He may have just solidified himself as the UFC newcomer of the year with this knockout victory, and I believe is just one more win away from getting a top 15 opponent at 155. And last but not least, capping out the UFC 321 recap is none other than Valter Walker, because this guy just keeps making history. Literally. He just won his 4th fight in a row. After starting his UFC career 0-1, losing his debut to Lucas Bresky, he hasn't looked back. And not only is it 4 victories in a row, not only is it 4 finishes in a row, not only are those 4 finishes all by way of submission, but all 4 of those submission victories are by way of heel hook. That is right. 4 consecutive heel hook submission wins in a row, something that has never been done before in UFC history, and Valter is now tied for the most heel hooks ever in UFC history with 4. And all 4 of them have also taken place in the opening round of his fights. This guy is one of the hottest things going in the heavyweight division, and who would have thought that in the aftermath of UFC 321, between this fight, the number 1 contendership bout between Volkov and Almeida, and the championship bout between Gane and Aspinall, that Valter Walker in the aftermath aftermath, would be the biggest heavyweight rising momentum fighter. He currently sits at number 15 in the heavyweight division and should absolutely be fighting upward. However, he wants to make a quick turnaround in less than a month and fight at UFC Qatar, and he called out Hamdi Abdelwahab, who earlier in the night got a victory over Huggy Bear Chris Barnett. And so while it's a fight that absolutely doesn't make sense for Walter Walker, considering he's a ranked heavyweight riding a 4-fight win streak, it absolutely is the fight that UFC will make. And they're going to make that fight because Walter Walker has a big opportunity to win 5 straight fights, all by heel hook. So if he can get that win over Abdelwahab in less than a month's time at UFC Qatar, then moving into 2026 UFC, please make this guy fight upwards in the rankings because he's the hottest thing going in this weight class post UFC 321. Wow, that is something I didn't expect to say. So that is it for the UFC 321 recap, and I want to get all of your thoughts and your takeaways down in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this recap, please be sure to drop a like and subscribe to the channel if you are new, because we are on the road to reaching 1,000 subscribers, and the goal is to hit that milestone before the end of the year, so any and all support is greatly appreciated. You can also join the community on social media at Verbal Spar MMA on X, Instagram, and TikTok, and you can follow on your favorite audio listening platforms such as Spotify and Apple, where every Monday and Friday podcast episodes release there. Have a great week, and I will see you all in the next video.